According to Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher, it is important to understand what an El Niño and a La Niña weather pattern means when it comes to agriculture. During an El Niño and a La Niña, there is a change of pressure patterns along the equatorial Pacific region. Due to the El Niño's weaker pressure patterns, the air currents are unable to pull the surface of the ocean in a westward fashion, causing a pooling of warmer than normal water in the central equatorial Pacific. During a La Niña, however, the pressure patterns are stronger and cause more upwelling cold water at the surface that is then moved westward along the equatorial Pacific. We recently met with Al to learn more about these weather patterns, but began by asking him why the Climate Prediction Center recently sent out an El Niño watch.
We look at the equatorial region for a signature showing either above normal or below normal temperatures, and we look underneath the equatorial Pacific to see what the movement of water that's going to feed into that system. At present, we have an established warm pocket in the equatorial Pacific, and underneath of the equatorial Pacific, essentially from Australia all the way over to South America, we have a significant pool of warm water. So that's the feeder or conveyor belt for this system. That means that it's going to keep energizing that area with these above normal temperatures. Hence, we have an El Niño watch that's been put out by the Climate Prediction Center.
So how often does the El Niño occur, and when is it most generally the most significant?
Okay. Most of the events will come on an average return of 1 in 3 to 1 in 5 years, and about 1 out of every 3 events, not quite 1 out of every 2, but somewhere between 1 out of every 2 to 1 out of every 3 is what we call a multi-year event, meaning that it will last more than 1 season. Generally, we look in the late summer for the event to start materializing, strengthening as it goes into the fall, reaching a peak strength generally between Christmas and about the 3rd week of January. They can die earlier, they can last later, but that's what the mean is of all of the different events. And then we start to see a slow waning of that event as we go into the spring. Now, if we still maintain levels that are within the threshold of being either an El Niño or La Niña as we go into that April and May period, that's when we begin to watch to see whether or not this is a multi-year event. And generally under a multi-year event, the same patterns that are established in year 1 of the event tend to intensify in year 2. So if you're in a wet pattern, you get wetter. If you're in a dry pattern, you get drier.
So what are some of the typical responses that occur across the Southern Hemisphere?
Right. Since this event typically peaks out during the Southern Hemisphere's summer growing season or our winter period, that's where we see the greatest agricultural impacts. And during El Niño events, typically we see on an average response coming out of Australia below normal wheat yields, out of Brazil normal to below normal soybean, below normal corn yields out of South Africa, but above normal corn yields coming out of Argentina. During La Niña events, we see the polar opposite, above normal wheat in Australia, above normal corn in South Africa, above normal soybeans in Brazil, but below normal corn in Argentina. So some of the problems we had last year in Argentina, we were going through a La Niña event, and we've seen some significant repercussions in terms of that yield. And that's important this year. We had a lot of debate of whether the tariffs that are in place. So this is another thing that producers should be looking to the Southern Hemisphere to see if they have some production hiccups, particularly as this event unfolds. Now, this event is not expected to be a strong event, and sometimes these weak and moderate events do not have nearly the signature that we see during the stronger events. So when we say 70%, it's not a guarantee. There's that 30% that basically doesn't fall in line. And those tend to be under the weaker events. So we have to keep that in the back of our mind. It's not a guarantee, but it gives us a direction of where the climate conditions in the Southern Hemisphere may play out as we go through this next 6 months to 9 month period.
So what about North America then?
Okay, in North America, typically we see the southern jet stream become the more dominant feature at the expense of the northern jet stream. And so we see the northern jet stream displace a little bit farther than its mean winter position, and the southern jet stream becomes strong. So as that becomes stronger, there's an area caught between the 2 jet streams that's kind of caught in no man's land. We call this a split flow pattern. Systems move to the north or to the south of the area caught in between these 2 jets. Typically that occurs in the northern to central plains and including the northern Rockies. So we've started to see the monsoon kick up. The warm waters off of Mexico have led to the generation of tropical systems earlier than expected. We expected an above normal season, and a couple of those have already moved up the Baja Peninsula. We typically see that late in the season. So everything that we're seeing is pointing toward an increased flux of moisture into the southwest as we progress through the summer, into this fall period. That's probably our initial signs that the southern jet is kicking up. So from that point forward, what we looked for is, do we see the high pressure that's been dominating the southwest start to shift toward the north, push the northern jet stream to the north, and then to the east. And during most of these events, we carve out a small trough over the Great Lakes and the Pacific, or excuse me, the northeastern United States, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, kind of caught between those two flow patterns. So we tend to have more benign winter. Now, caution on that is because of the weak event, that northern jet may not be as weak as we would normally anticipate. And so really it's going to boil down to our fall and winter period, where that jet sets up, the northern jet. If it stays in the position it has been for the last 6 weeks, then we're going to have a lot rougher time here in north central Nebraska and points to the north with all the heavy precip that will continue on through the fall period. But if that shifts like it normally does toward the Great Lakes, then we see a drying pattern establish itself, particularly over the northern plains this fall and in through the spring period. Whereas the southern plains, including southern Nebraska, kind of gets taken the other way. Polar opposite what we've been seeing the last few weeks or months, and that is we see a wetter pattern establishing itself in the central and southern plains. So the weak complex usually is the biggest beneficiary of these above normal precipitation patterns during El Nino, and of course coming off of a very strong drought. This would also spell good things possibly occurring for the southern Rockies. At the same token, the southern Rockies during El Nino events generally favors above normal snowfall. Then we see below normal snowfall developing in the northern Rockies, which we start to look in the spring period to see whether or not that would help to establish more drought signature in that region as we get into the warm season precipitation events.